In Lesson 6C, we're going to extend what we did in Lesson 6B. Remember, in 6B, we learned what containers, components, and layout managers were, and did a simple little example using one type of container and one type of component and one type of layout manager. We'll try and learn a little bit more about what your possible choices are. When you're done with this video, you're going to want to watch the video that gives you practice in Eclipse, and probably have Eclipse up at the same time and type along with me so that you've got working examples of code. So let's get going on 6C. There are many different window containers that you can use in Java. These are the classes that you'll extend in your own GUI programs. When you create your own class, like in 6B we had something called sample frame, you're going to extend one of these: a J window, a J frame, or a J dialog. A J window is a borderless rectangle. There's no title bar, there's no close button. It's rarely used, but it's necessary to create custom desktop widgets. If you want to override everything and make this look like not a standard framed window, but look like whatever creative graphic you have in mind for your application, you would have to implement a J window, and you'd have an awful lot of overriding you'd have to do. What we're typically going to do is extend J frame. This gives you a title bar, the border around the window, the minimize, maximize, and close buttons. It's the most commonly used container. This is the standard window that you're used to seeing in a desktop application. So we're going to do a lot of stuff with J-frames. And then sometimes you might want to use a J dialog. It looks like a J-frame, but it generally, when you've got a frame going, maybe you click on something that says enter my options, and it will bring up a dialog, another window that lets you put some information in, and then you dismiss that dialog. It can be modal, which means it runs on top of an application, and you can't do anything else in the application until you dismiss the dialog. Or it could be non-modal. You can do other things in the application while the dialog is present. The dialog is always there. Often in, say, a graphics desktop application, there might be a tool palette that is a non-modal dialog that can always be present no matter what else you're doing. Okay, J window, J frame, J dialog, but we're going to concentrate on J frames. Now, you're going to do your setup work in the constructor for your class that extends J frame, or J dialog, or J window. There are some things you absolutely must do in the setup because Java has chosen some pretty stupid defaults. The default size of a window provided by Java is no good. The width and the height of that window are 0 pixels wide and 0 pixels high in Microsoft Windows. Obviously, a window that is 0 pixels wide can't be seen by anybody. It is full screen on a lot of other systems. I think that's true on Mac, but I'm not certain which operating systems on a Mac do that. So you have to explicitly call set size within your constructor, giving it a width and a height, to make this window the size you want it to be. And the window that you create and put things on is invisible by default. You have to explicitly call set visible, passing in a parameter of true, if you want anybody to be able to see and interact with your window. Now, how do we place components within a container? Once you've got your container, use the add method within the container to add any component. The position of a component within a container is controlled by a layout manager object, and you use set layout, passing it whatever your layout manager is in the container to set up the one you want. We had an example of that in 6B, where we were using a flow layout, I think, by default. There are several predefined layout managers that exist. There are many others. These are the three we'll use: a flow layout, a border layout, and a grid layout. The flow layout is the simplest type. It arranges components left to right, horizontally centered. This is the default layout for any panel subclasses, like your content pane. Defaults to a flow layout if you don't do anything to change it. So if I have a container with a flow layout and I add 4 buttons, all 4 buttons will be visible. They will show up left to right in the order that I added them. A border layout is another way that I can take a container and turn it into 5 defined areas: a north, east, west, south, and center. This is the default layout for window subclasses. We're going to see some examples of that coming up. And a grid layout lets me have evenly spaced sets of rows and columns. So if I wanted to line up some buttons very precisely, maybe to look like a telephone keypad, I might want to use a grid layout. So let's talk a little bit about a flow layout. You would use the following Java code to set the layout of any container to a flow layout. Whatever your component name is, like content pane. .set layout, passing as a parameter a new flow layout. You can add any number of components to a container that has a flow layout. They get added from left to right. Those components could be buttons or text fields or labels or whatever other components you've got. And they get added left to right in the flow layout. You could have a border layout. You'd use the following code to set the layout of any container to a border layout. Component name .set layout, passing it one parameter, which would be a new border layout. You can only add one component to each region in a border layout. If you do more, the earlier ones are overridden. So you can put one thing in the north, one thing in the west, one thing in the center, one thing in the east, one thing in the south. Maybe you want a scroll bar in the east. Maybe you just want a status message in the south. But maybe you want lots of things in the center. You're going to have to take this center and add one component only to it, but you can make that component be a panel, and the panel can have components in it. Yeah, I know, it gets a little bit tricky with it's helpful to draw pictures for yourself. The flow layout has 5 regions and only one component in a region, but you can make that component be a panel that can have more components in it. Relax, we will do examples like this in our Eclipse practice video. And a grid layout. Java code to set the layout of any container to a grid layout is whatever your component name is, .set layout, passing it one parameter. A new grid layout where you pass it the number of rows you want, the number of columns you want, the horizontal gap, that is the number of pixels in between columns, so the gap right here and right here, and the vertical gap, the number of pixels in between whatever your different regions are going to be from one row to another. You can only add one component to each cell in a grid layout. They get added left to right, top to bottom. So if you've got something with a grid layout and you add 6 buttons to it, the first button goes in row 1, column 1, second one in row 1, column 2, third one in row 1, column 3, fourth one in row 2, column 1, and so on.